The Spirit of Tom Molyneux. Many fights are won and lost by the living, but this is a tale of one which was won by a man dead over 100 years. John Tavrell, manager of Ring Champions, sitting in the old East Side AC one cold wintry day, told me this story of the ghost that won the fight and the man who worshipped the ghost. Let John Tavrell tell the tale in his own words, as he told it to me. You remember Ace Jessel, the great Negro boxer whom I managed. An ebony giant he was, 4 inches over 6 feet in height, his fighting weight 230 pounds. He moved with the smooth ease of a gigantic leopard, and his pliant steel muscles rippled under his shiny skin. A clever boxer for so large a man, he carried the smashing jolt of a trip hammer in each huge black fist. Yet for all that, the road over which I, as his manager, steered him was far from smooth, and at times I despaired, for Ace seemed to lack a fighting heart. Courage he had plenty, courage to stand up to a vicious beating, and to keep on going after his face had been pounded and battered to a bloody mass, as he proved in that terrible battle with Maul Finnegan, which became almost mythical in boxing annals. Courage he had, but not the aggressiveness which drives the perfect fighter ever to the attack, nor the killer instinct which sends him plunging after the reeling, bloody and beaten foe, and a boxer who lacks these qualities is likely to fail when put to the supreme test. Ace was content to box mostly, outpointing his opponents and piling up just enough lead to keep from losing, and the public was never fond of these tactics. Therefore they jeered and booed him every so often, but though their taunts angered me, they only broadened Ace's good-natured grin. And his fights still drew great crowds, because on the rare occasions when he was stung out of his defensive role, or when he was matched with a clever man whom he had to knock out in order to win, the fans saw a real battle that thrilled their blood. And even so, time and again he stepped away from a sagging foe, giving the beaten man time to recover and return to the attack, instead of finishing him while the crowd raved and I tore my hair. Now Ace Jessel, indifferent drifter, happy-go-lucky wastrel though he seemed, had one deep and abiding emotion, and that was a fanatical worship for one Tom Molyneux, first champion of America and sturdy fighting man of color, according to some authorities, the greatest black ringman that ever lived. Tom Molyneux died in Ireland 100 years ago, but the memory of his valiant deeds in America and Europe was Ace Jessel's direct incentive to action. Reading an account of Tom's life and battles was what started Ace on the fistic trail which led from the wharves where he toiled as a young boy to but listen to the story. Ace's most highly prized possession was a painted portrait of the old battler. He had discovered this, a rare find indeed, since even woodcuts of Molyneux are rare among the collections of a London sportsman, and had prevailed on the owner to sell it. Paying for it had taken every cent that Ace made in 4 fights, but he counted it cheap at the price. He removed the original frame and replaced it with a frame of solid silver, a slim, elegant work of art which, considering that the portrait was full length and life-size, was rather more than extravagant. But no honor was too expensive for Misto Tom, and Ace simply tripled the number of his bouts to meet the cost. So finally my brains and Ace's mallet fists had cleared us a road to the top of the game. Ace loomed up as a heavyweight menace, and the champion's manager was ready to sign with us when an interruption came. A form hove into view on the fistic horizon which dwarfed and overshadowed all other contenders, including my man. This was Mankiller Gomez. He was all which his name implies. Gomez was his ring name, given him by the Spaniard who discovered him and brought him to America. His real name was Balanga Guma, and he was a full-blooded Senegalese from the west coast of Africa. Once in a century, ring fans see a man like Gomez in action. Once in 100 years, there rises a fighter like the Senegalese-born killer who crashes through the general ruck of fighters as a buffalo crashes through a thicket of dead wood. He was a savage, a tiger. What he lacked in actual skill, he made up by ferocity of attack, by ruggedness of body and smashing power of arm. From the time he landed in New York, with a long list of European victories behind him, it was inevitable that he should batter down all opposition, and at last the white champion looked to see the black savage looming above the broken forms of his victims. The champion saw the writing on the wall, but the public was clamoring for a match and whatever else his faults. The title holder was a fighting champion. Ace Jessel, who alone of all the foremost challengers had not met Gomez, was shoved into discard, and as early summer dawned on New York, a title was lost and won, and Mankiller Gomez, son of the Black Jungle, rose up king of all fighting men. The sporting world and the public at large hated and feared the new champion. Boxing fans liked savagery in the ring, but Gomez did not confine his ferocity to the ring. His soul was abysmal. He was ape-like, primordial, the very spirit of that morass of barbarism from which mankind has so tortuously climbed, and toward which men look with so much suspicion. There went forth a search for a white hope, but the result was always the same. Challenger after challenger went down before the terrible onslaught of the man-killer, and at last only one man remained who had not crossed gloves with Gomez Ace Jessel. I hesitated in throwing my man in with a battler like Gomez, for my fondness for the great good-natured Negro was more than the friendship of manager for fighter. Ace was something more than a meal ticket to me, for I knew the real nobility underlying Ace's black skin, and I hated to see him battered into a senseless ruin by a man I knew in my heart to be more than Jessel's match. I wanted to wait a while to let Gomez wear himself out with his terrific battles and the dissipations that were sure to follow the savage's success. These super sluggers never last long, any more than a jungle native can withstand the temptations of civilization. But the slump that follows a really great title holder's gaining the belt was on, and matches were scarce. The public was clamoring for a title fight. Sports writers were raising Cain and accusing Ace of cowardice. Promoters were offering alluring purses, and at last I signed for a 15-round go between man-killer Gomez and Ace Jessel. At the training quarters, I turned to Ace. "Ace, do you think you can whip him?" "Mr. John," Ace answered, meeting my eye with a straight gaze. "I'll do my best, but I's mighty afeard I can't do it. Dat man ain't human." I knew this was bad. A man is more than half whipped when he goes into the ring in that frame of mind. Later I came into Ace's room for something and halted in the doorway in amazement. I had heard the battler talking in a low voice as I came up, but had supposed one of the handlers or sparring partners was in the room with him. Now I saw that he was alone. He was standing before his idol, the portrait of Tom Molyneux. "Misto Tom," he was saying humbly, "I ain't never met no man yet what could even knock me off my feet, but I reckon that nigga can. I's gwine to need help mighty bad, Misto Tom." I felt almost as if I had interrupted a religious rite. It was uncanny. Had it not been for Ace's evident deep sincerity, I would have felt it to be unholy. But to Ace, Tom Molyneux was something more than a saint. I stood in the doorway in silence, watching the strange tableau. The artist who painted the picture so long ago had wrought with remarkable skill. The short black figure seemed to stand out boldly from the faded canvas. A breath of bygone days, it seemed, clad in the long tights of that other day, the powerful legs braced far apart, the knotted arms held stiffly and high, just as Molyneux had appeared when he fought Tom Cribb of England so long ago. Ace Jessel stood before the painted figure, head sunk upon his mighty chest as if listening to some dim whisper inside his own soul. And as I watched, a curious and fantastic thought came into my brain. The memory of an age-old superstition. You know, it has been said by delvers into the occult that the carving of statues or the painting of pictures has power to draw back from the void of eternity souls long flown and to recreate them in shadowy semblance. I wondered if Ace had ever heard of this superstition and thought by doing obeisance to Molyneux's portrait to conjure the dead man's spirit out of the realms of the dead for advice and aid. I shrugged my shoulders at this ridiculous idea and turned away. As I did, I glanced again at the picture before which Ace still stood like a great image of black basalt, and was aware of a peculiar illusion. The canvas seemed to ripple slightly, like the surface of a lake across which a faint breeze is blowing. However, I forgot all this as the day of the fight drew near. The great crowd cheered Ace to the echo as he climbed in the ring, cheered again, not so heartily, as Gomez appeared. They afforded a strange contrast, those two Negroes, alike in color, but how different in all other aspects. Ace was tall, clean-limbed and rangy, long and smooth of muscle, clear of eye, and broad of forehead. Gomez seemed stocky by comparison, though he stood a good 6 feet 2. Where Jessel's sinews were long and smooth like great cables, his were knotty and bulging. His calves, thighs, arms, and shoulders stood out in great bunches of muscles. His small bullet head was set squarely between gigantic shoulders, and his forehead was so low that his kinky wool seemed to lower over his small bestial and bloodshot eyes. On his chest was a thick grizzle of matted black hair. He grinned cavernously, thumped his breast, and flexed his mighty arms with the insolent assurance of the savage. Ace, in his corner, grinned at the crowd, but an ashy tint was on his dusky face, and his knees trembled. The usual remarks were made, instructions given by the referee, weights announced, 230 for Ace, 248 for Gomez. Then, over the great stadium, the lights went off save for those over the ring where two black giants faced each other like men alone on the ridge of the world. At the gong, Gomez whirled in his corner and came out with a breathtaking roar of pure ferocity. Ace, frightened though he must have been, rushed to meet him with the courage of a caveman charging a gorilla, and they met headlong in the center of the ring. The first blow was the man-killer's, a left swing that glanced Ace's ribs. Jessel came back with a long left to the face and a straight right to the body that stung. Gomez bowled in, swinging both hands, and Ace, after one futile attempt to mix it with him, gave back. The champion drove him across the ring, sending in a savage left to the body as Ace clinched. As they broke, Gomez shot a terrible right to the chin, and Ace reeled into the ropes. A great "ah" went up from the crowd as the champion plunged after him like a famished wolf, but Ace managed to dive between the lashing arms and clinch, shaking his head to clear it. Gomez sent in a left, largely smothered by Ace's clutching arms, and the referee warned the Senegalese. At the break, Ace stepped back, jabbing swift and cleverly with his left, and the round ended with the champion bellowing like a buffalo, trying to get past that rapier-like arm. Between rounds, I cautioned Ace to keep away from infighting as much as possible, where Gomez's superior strength would count heavily, and to use his footwork to avoid punishment as much as he could. The second round started much like the first, Gomez rushing and Ace using all his skill to stave him off and avoid those terrible smashes. It's hard to get a shifty boxer like Ace in a corner, when he is fresh and unweakened and at long range had the advantage of his superior science over Gomez, whose one idea was to get in close and batter down his foes by sheer strength and ferocity. Still, in spite of Ace's speed and skill, just before the gong sounded, Gomez got the range and sank a vicious left to the wrist in Ace's midriff, and the tall Negro weaved slightly as he walked to his corner. I could see the beginning of the end. The vitality and power of Gomez seemed endless. There was no wearing him down, and it would not take many of his blows, landed, to rob Ace of his speed of foot and accuracy of eye. Then, forced to stand and trade punches, he was done. Gomez, seeing he had stung his man, came plunging out for the third round with murder in his eye. He ducked a straight left, took a hard right uppercut square in the face, and hooked both hands to the body, then straightened with a terrific right to the chin, which Ace robbed of most of its force by swaying with the blow. And while the champion was still off balance, Ace measured him coolly and shot in a fierce right hook flush on the chin. Gomez's head flew back as if hinged to his shoulders, and he was stopped in his tracks. But even as the crowd rose, hands clenching, lips parted in hopes he would go down, the champion shook his bullet head and came in roaring. The round ended with both men locked in a clinch in the center of the ring. At the beginning of the fourth round, Gomez attacked and drove Ace about the ring before a shower of blows which he could not seem to wholly avoid. Stung and desperate, Ace made a stand in a neutral corner and sent Gomez back on his heels with a left and right to the body, but took a savage left to the face in return. Then suddenly the champion crashed through with a deadly left to the solar plexus, and as Ace staggered, shot a killing right to the chin. Ace fell back into the ropes, instinctively raising his hands and sinking his chin on his chest. Gomez's short, fierce smashes were partly blocked by his shielding gloves, and suddenly, pinned on the ropes as he was, and still dazed from the man-killer's attack, Ace went into terrific action, and slugging toe-to-toe with the champion, beat him off and drove him back across the ring. The crowd went insane, but crouching behind Ace's corner, I saw the writing on the wall. Ace was fighting as he had never fought before, but no man on earth could stand the pace the champion was setting. Battling along the ropes, Ace sent a savage left to the body and a right and left to the face, but was repaid by a right-hand smash to the ribs that made him wince in spite of himself. And just at the gong, Gomez landed another of those deadly left-handers to the body. Ace's handlers worked over him swiftly, for I saw that the tall black was weakening. A few more rounds of this would spell the end. "Ace, can't you keep away from those body smashes?" "Mr. John, sir, I'll try," he answered. The gong. Ace came in with a rush, his magnificent body vibrating with dynamic energy. Gomez met him, his iron muscles bunching into a compact fighting unit. Crash, crash, and again crash. A clinch, and as they broke, Gomez drew back his great right arm and launched a terrible blow to Ace's mouth. The tall Negro reeled. He went down. Then, without stopping for the count, which I was screaming for him to take, he gathered his long, steely legs under him and was up with a bound, blood gushing down his black chest. Gomez leaped in, and Ace, with the fury of desperation, met him with a terrific right, square to the jaw. And Gomez crashed to the canvas on his shoulder blades. The crowd rose screaming. In the space of 10 seconds, both men had been floored for the first time in the life of each. 1, 2, 3, 4. The referee's arm rose and fell. Gomez was up, unhurt, wild with fury. Roaring like a wild beast, he plunged in, brushed aside Ace's hammering arms, and crashed his right hand with the full weight of his mighty shoulder behind it, full into Ace's midriff. Jessel went an ashy color. He swayed like a tall tree, and Gomez beat him to his knees with rights and lefts, which sounded like the blows of caulking mallets. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ace was writhing on the canvas, striving to get his legs beneath him. The roar of the fans was a torrent of sound, an ocean of noise which drowned out all thought. 5, 6, 7. Ace was up. Gomez came charging across the stained canvas, gibbering his pagan fury. His blows beat upon the staggering challenger like a hail of sledges. A left, a right, another left, which Ace had not strength to duck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Again, Ace was up, weaving, staring blankly, helpless. A swinging left hurled him back into the ropes, and rebounding from them, he went to his knees. The gong. As his handlers and I sprang into the ring, Ace groped blindly for his corner and dropped limply upon the stool. Ace, he's too much for you. A grin bent Jessel's bloody lips, and an indomitable spirit looked out of his bloodshot eyes. "Mr. John, please, sir, don't throw in the sponge. Must I take it? I takes it standing. That boy can't last at this pace all night, sir." No, but neither could Ace Jessel, in spite of his remarkable vitality and his marvelous recuperative powers, which sent him back up for the next round, with a show of renewed strength and freshness at least. The 6th and 7th were comparatively tame. Perhaps Gomez really was fatigued from the terrific pace he had been setting. At any rate, Ace managed to make it more or less of a sparring match at long range, and the crowd was treated to an exhibition showing how long a man, out on his feet, can stand off and keep away from a slugger bent solely on his destruction. Even I marveled at the brand of boxing which Ace was showing, even though I knew that Gomez was fighting cautiously for him. He had sampled the power of Ace's right hand in that frenzied 5th round, and perhaps he was wary of a trick. For the first time in his life, he had sprawled on the canvas. He knew he was winning, and I think he was content to rest a couple of rounds, take his time for a space, and gather his energies for a final onslaught. This began as the gong sounded for the 8th round. Gomez launched his usual sledgehammer attack, drove Ace about the ring, and floored him in a neutral corner. His style of fighting was such that when he was determined on a foe's destruction, skill, speed, and science could not avert but only postpone the eventual outcome. Ace took the count of 9 and rose, backpedaling. But Gomez was after him. The champion missed twice with his left, and then sank a right under the heart that turned Ace ashy. A left to the jaw made his knees buckle, and he clinched desperately. On the breakaway, Ace sent a straight left to the face and right hook to the chin, but the blows lacked their old force, and Gomez shook them off and sank his left wrist deep in Ace's midsection. Ace again clinched, but the champion shoved him away and drove him across the ring with savage hooks to the body. At the gong, they were slugging along the ropes. Ace reeled to the wrong corner, and when his handlers led him to his own, he sank down on the stool, his legs trembling and his great dusky chest heaving from his superhuman exertions. I glanced across at the champion, who sat glowering at his foe. He too was showing signs of the fray, but he was much fresher than Ace. The referee walked over, looked at Jessel hesitantly, and then spoke to me. Through the mists which veiled his bruised brain, Ace realized the import of his words and struggled to rise, a kind of fear flaming in his eyes. "Mr. John, don't let him stop it, sir. Don't let him do it. I ain't hut nothing like Dad'd hut me." The referee shrugged his shoulders and walked back to the center of the ring, and I turned to one of the trainers and bade him bring me the flat bundle I had brought with me into the stadium. There was little use giving advice to Ace. He was too battered to understand. In his numbed brain, there was room only for one thought: to fight and keep on fighting. The old primal instinct that is stronger than all things save death. At the sound of the gong, he reeled out to meet his doom with an indomitable courage that brought the crowd to its feet, yelling. He struck, a wild, aimless left, and the champion plunged in, hitting with both hands until Ace went down. At 9, he was up and backpedaled instinctively until Gomez reached him with a long, straight right and sent him down again. Again he took 9 before he reeled up, and now the crowd was silent. Not one voice was raised in an urge for the kill. This was butchery, primitive slaughter, and the courage of Ace Jessel took their breath as it gripped my heart. Ace fell blindly into a clinch, and another till the man-killer, furious, shook him off and sank his right to the body. Ace's ribs gave way like rotten wood, with a dry crack heard distinctly all over the stadium. A strangled cry went up from the crowd, and Jessel gasped thickly and fell to his knees. 7, 8, and the great black form was writhing on the canvas. 9, and the miracle had happened, and Ace was on his feet, swaying, jaw sagging, arms hanging limply. Gomez glared at him, not in pity, but as if unable to understand how his foe could have risen again, then came plunging in to finish him. Ace was in dire straits. Blood blinded him, and his feet slipped in great smears of it on the canvas. His blood. Both eyes were nearly closed, and when he breathed gustily through his smashed nose, a red haze surrounded him. Deep cuts gashed cheek and cheekbones, and his left side was a mass of battered red flesh. He was going on fighting instinct alone now, and never again would any man doubt that Ace Jessel had a fighting heart. Yet a fighting heart alone is not enough when the body that holds it is broken and battered, and mists of unconsciousness veil the brain. Ace sank down before Gomez's panting onslaught, and this time the crowd knew that it was final. When a man has taken the beating that Ace had taken, something more than body and heart must come into the game to carry him through. Something to inspire and stimulate the dazed brain, to fire it to heights of superhuman achievement. I had planned to furnish this inspiration, if the worst came to the worst, in the only way which I knew would touch Ace. Before leaving the training quarters, I had, unknown to Ace, removed the picture of Tom Molyneux from its frame and brought it to the stadium with me, carefully wrapped. I now took this, and as Ace's eyes, instinctively and without his own volition, sought his corner, I held the portrait up, just outside the glare of the ring lights, so while illumined by them, it appeared elusive and dim. It may be thought that I acted wrongly and selfishly, to thus seek to bring to his feet for more punishment a man almost dead from the beating, but the outsider cannot fathom the souls of the children of the fight game, to whom winning is greater than life, and losing worse than death. All eyes were glued on the prostrate form in the center of the ring, on the wind-blown champion sagging against the ropes, on the arm of the referee, which rose and fell with the regularity of doom. I doubt if 4 men in the audience saw my action, but Ace Jessel saw. I caught the gleam that came into his bloodshot and dazed eyes. I saw him shake his head violently. I saw him begin sluggishly to gather his long legs under him. It seemed a long time. The drone of the referee rose as it neared its climax. Then by all the gods, Ace Jessel was up. The crowd went insane and screaming. I saw his eyes blaze with a strange, wild light. And as I lived today, the picture in my hands shook suddenly and violently. A cold wind passed like death across me, and I heard the man next to me shiver involuntarily as he drew his coat closer about him. But it was no cold wind that gripped my soul as I looked, wide-eyed and staring, into the ring where the greatest drama the boxing world has ever known was being enacted. There was Ace Jessel, bloody, terrible, throbbing and pulsing with new dynamic life, fired by a superhuman power. There was man-killer Gomez, speechless with amazement at his foe's new burst of fury. There was the immobile-faced referee, and to my horror I saw that there were 4 men in that ring, and the fourth a short, massive black man, barrel-chested and mighty-limbed, clad in the long tights of another day. And as I looked, I saw that this man was not as other men, for beyond him I saw the ropes of the ring, and dimly, the ring lights, as if I were looking through a dark mist, as if I were looking through him. His mighty arm was about Ace Jessel's waist as my fighter crashed upon the weary and disheartened Gomez. His bare, hard fists fell with aces on the head and body of the desperate man-killer. Whether Gomez saw or realized he saw this stranger, I do not know. Dazed by the unnaturalness of Ace's sudden comeback, by the uncanny strength of Ace who should have been fainting on the canvas, Gomez staggered, weakening. Bewildered and mazed, he was unable to decide upon a stand to make, and before he could rally was beaten down, crashed and battered down and out by long, straight smashes sent in with the speed and power of a pile driver. And the last blow, a straight right that would have felled an ox, and did fell man-killer Gomez, was driven not alone by the power of Ace's mighty shoulder, but by the aid of a shadowy black hand on Jessel's wrist. As I live today, that fourth man guided Ace's hand to Gomez's chin and backed the blow with the power of his own tremendous shoulders. A moment the strange tableau burned itself into my brain. The astounded referee counting over the prostrate champion, and Ace Jessel, standing, head lowered and arms dangling, supported by a short, mighty figure in long ring tights. Then this figure faded before my very gaze, and as the portrait of Tom Molyneux fell from my nerveless fingers, I felt it shake as if it shuddered. As I climbed into the ring with the roar of the insane fans thundering in my brain, I wondered dazedly as I wonder today, was I given to see that sight alone of all that throng because I held the picture in my hands? The crowd saw only a miracle, a man beaten nearly to death coming back with unexplainable strength and vitality to conquer his conqueror. They did not see the fourth man, nor did man-killer Gomez. Ace Jessel, a Negro never talks on some subjects, and I have never asked him any questions on that matter. But as he collapsed in his corner, I bent over him and heard him murmur as he lost consciousness. "Misto Tom, he done it, so his hand was on my wrist when I dropped Gomez." That old superstition is justified as far as I am concerned. Hereafter, I will not doubt that deep devotion coupled with the possession of a lifelike portrait can conjure back from the unknown voids of the astral world the soul or spirit or ghost which inhabited the living body of which the portrait is a likeness. A door, perhaps, a portrait is, through which astral beings pass back and forth between this world and the next, whatever that world may be. But when I said no man save Ace Jessel and I saw the fourth man, I'm not altogether correct. After the bout, the referee, a steely-nerved, cold-eyed son of the old-time school, said to me, "Did you notice in that last round that a cold wind seemed to blow across the ring? Now tell me straight, am I going crazy, or did I see a dark shadow hovering about Ace Jessel when he dropped Gomez?" "You did," I answered, "and unless we are all insane, the ghost of Tom Molyneux was in that ring tonight." Casanetto's last song eyed the package curiously. It was thin and flat, and the address was written clearly in the curving, elegant hand I had learned to hate, the hand I knew to now be cold in death. "You had better be careful, Gordon," said my friend Costigan. "Sure, why should that black devil be sending you anything but something to do you harm?" "I had thought of a bomb or something similar," I answered, "but this is too thin a package to contain anything like that. I'll open it." "By the powers," Costigan laughed shortly. "'Tis one of his songs he's sending you. An ordinary phonograph record lay before us. Ordinary, did I say? I might say the most extraordinary record in the world, for to the best of our knowledge it was the only one which held imprisoned in its flat bosom the golden voice of Giovanni Casanetto, that great and evil genius whose operatic singing had thrilled the world, and whose dark and mysterious crimes had shocked that same world. The death cell where Casanetto lay awaits the next doomed one, and the black singer lies dead," said Costigan. "What then is the spell of this disc that he sends it to the man whose testimony sent him to the gallows?" I shrugged my shoulders. By no art of mine, but purely through accident, had I stumbled upon Casanetto's monstrous secret. By no wish of mine had I come upon the cavern where he practiced ancient abominations and offered up human sacrifices to the devil he worshipped. But what I had seen I told in court, and before the hangman adjusted the noose, Casanetto had promised me such a fate as no man had ever experienced before. All the world knew of the atrocities practiced by the inhuman demonic cult of which Casanetto had been high priest, and now that he was dead, records made of his voice were sought by wealthy collectors, but according to the terms of his last wishes, all of these had been destroyed. At least I had thought so, but the thin, round disc in my hand proved that at least one had escaped the general destruction. I gazed at it, but the surface in the center was blank and without title. "Read the note," suggested Costigan. A small slip of white paper had been contained in the package also. I scanned it. The letters were in Casanetto's handwriting, to my friend Stephen Gordon, to be listened to alone in his study. "That's all," I said, after reading this curious request aloud. "Sure, and 'tis more than enough. Is it not black magic he's trying to make on you? Else why should he wish you to listen to his caterwauling alone? I don't know, but I think I'll do it." "You're a fool," said Costigan frankly. "If you will not be taking my advice and throwing the thing into the sea, it's myself will be with you when you put it on your talking machine. And that's final." I did not try to argue. Truly, I was somewhat apprehensive of Casanetto's promised vengeance, though I could not see how this was to be accomplished by the mere rendition of a song heard on a phonograph. Costigan and I repaired to my study, and there placed on the machine the last record of Giovanni Casanetto's golden voice. I saw Costigan's jaw muscles bulge belligerently as the disc began to whirl and the diamond point to spin down the circling grooves. I involuntarily tensed myself as if for a coming struggle. Clear and loud a voice spoke. "Stephen Gordon." I started in spite of myself and almost answered. How strange and fearful it is to hear your name spoken in the voice of a man you know to be dead. "Stephen Gordon," the clear, golden, and hated voice went on. "If you hear this, I shall be dead, for if I live, I shall dispose of you in another manner. The police will soon be here, and they have cut off every avenue of escape. There is nothing for me to do but stand my trial, and your words will put a noose about my neck. But there is time for one last song. This song I shall imprison in the disc, which now rests upon my recording machine, and before the police arrive I shall send it to you by one who will not fail me. You will receive it through the mails the day after I am hanged. My friend, this is a suitable setting for the last song of the High Priest of Satan. I am standing in the black chapel where you first surprised me when you came blundering into my secret cavern, and my clumsy neophytes let you escape. Before me stands the shrine of the unnameable, and before it the red-stained altar where many a virgin soul has gone winging up to the dark stars. On all sides hover dark, mysterious things, and I hear the swish of mighty wings in the gloom. Satan, lover of darkness, gird my soul with evil and strike chords of horror in my golden song. Stephen Gordon, hearken ye. Full, deep, and triumphant, the golden voice surged up, lifted in a strange rhythmic chant, indescribably haunting and weird. "Great God," whispered Costigan. "He's singing the invocation from the Black Mass." I did not reply. The uncanny notes of that song seemed to stir my very heart within me. In the darksome caverns of my soul, something blind and monstrous moved and stirred like a dragon waking from slumber. The room faded and grew indistinct as I fell under the mesmeric power of the chant. About me, inhuman forces seemed to glide, and I could almost sense the touch of bat-like wings brushing my face in their flight, as though by virtue of his singing, the dead man had summoned up ancient and horrible demons to haunt me. I saw again the somber chapel, lit by a single small fire that flickered and leaped on the altar, behind and above which brooded the horror, the unnameable horned and winged thing to which the devil worshippers bowed. I saw again the red-dyed altar, the long sacrificial dagger raised in the hand of the black acolyte, the swaying robed forms of the worshippers. The voice rose and rose, swinging into a triumphant booming. It filled the room, the world, the sky, the universe. It blotted out the stars with a tangible veil of darkness. I staggered from it as from a physical force. If ever hate and evil were incarnated in sound, I heard and felt it then. That voice bore me down to the deeps of hell undreamed. Abysses loathsome and endless yawned before me. I had hints and glimpses of inhuman voids and unholy dimensions outside of all human experience. All the concentrated essence of purgatory flowed out at me from that whirling disc, on the wings of that wonderful and terrible voice. Cold sweat stood out on my body as I realized the feelings of a victim bound for the sacrifice. I was the victim. I lay on the altar and the hand of the slayer hovered above me, gripping the dagger. From the whirling disc, the voice surged on, sweeping me irresistibly to my doom, swinging higher and higher, deeper and deeper, tinged with insanity as it approached the climax. I realized my danger. I felt my brain crumbling before the onslaught of those spears of sound. I sought to speak, to scream, but my mouth gaped without sound. I tried to step forward, to shut off the machine, to break the record, but I could not move. Now the chant rose to heights unnameable and unbearable. A hideous triumph swept its notes. A million mocking devils screamed and bellowed at me, taunting me through that flood of demon music, as if the chant were a gate through which the hordes of hell came streaming, red-handed and roaring. Now it swept with dizzy speed toward the point where, in the black mass, the dagger drinks the life of the sacrifice, and with one last effort that strained fading soul and dimming brain, I broke the mesmeric chains. I screamed. An inhuman, unearthly shriek, the shriek of a soul being dragged into hell of a mind, being hurled into insanity. And echoing my screech came the shout of Costigan as he leaned forward and crashed his sledgehammer fist down on the top of the machine, smashing it and shattering into oblivion that terrible golden voice forever. The touch of death, as long as midnight cloaks the earth with shadows grim and stark, God save us from the Judas kiss of a dead man in the dark. Old Adam Farrell lay dead in the house wherein he had lived alone for the last 20 years. A silent, churlish recluse, in his life he had known no friends, and only 2 men had watched his passing. Dr. Stein rose and glanced out the window into the gathering dusk. "You think you can spend the night here, then?" he asked his companion. This man, Fallred by name, assented. "Yes, certainly. I guess it's up to me." "Rather a useless and primitive custom, sitting up with the dead," commented the doctor, preparing to depart. "But I suppose in common decency we will have to bow to precedents. Maybe I can find someone who will come over here and help you with your vigil." Fallred shrugged his shoulders. "I doubt it. Farrell wasn't liked, wasn't known by many people. I scarcely knew him myself, but I don't mind sitting up with the corpse." Dr. Stein was removing his rubber gloves, and Fallred watched the process with an interest that almost amounted to fascination. A slight, involuntary shudder shook him at the memory of touching these gloves, slick, cold, clammy things, like the touch of death. "You may get lonely tonight if I don't find anyone," the doctor remarked as he opened the door. "Not superstitious, are you?" Fallred laughed. "Scarcely. To tell the truth, from what I hear of Farrell's disposition, I'd rather be watching his corpse than have been his guest in life." The door closed and Fallred took up his vigil. He seated himself in the only chair the room boasted, glanced casually at the formless, sheeted bulk on the bed opposite him, and began to read by the light of the dim lamp which stood on the rough table. Outside, the darkness gathered swiftly, and finally Fallred laid down his magazine to rest his eyes. He looked again at the shape which had, in life, been the form of Adam Farrell, wondering what quirk in the human nature made the sight of a corpse not only so unpleasant, but such an object of fear to many. Unthinking ignorance, seeing in dead things a reminder of death to come, he decided lazily, and began idly contemplating as to what life had held for this grim and crabbed old man who had neither relatives nor friends, and who had seldom left the house wherein he had died. The usual tales of miser-hoarded wealth had accumulated, but Fallred felt so little interest in the whole matter that it was not even necessary for him to overcome any temptation to pry about the house for possible hidden treasure. He returned to his reading with a shrug. The task was more boresome than he had thought for. After a while, he was aware that every time he looked up from his magazine and his eyes fell upon the bed with its grim occupant, he started involuntarily as if he had, for an instant, forgotten the presence of the dead man and was unpleasantly reminded of the fact. The start was slight and instinctive, but he felt almost angered at himself. He realized, for the first inning, the utter and deadening silence which enwrapped the house, a silence apparently shared by the night, for no sound came through the window. Adam Farrell had lived as far apart from his neighbors as possible, and there was no other house within hearing distance. Fallred shook himself as if to rid his mind of unsavory speculations, and went back to his reading. A sudden vagrant gust of wind whipped through the window, in which the light in the lamp flickered and went out suddenly. Fallred, cursing softly, groped in the darkness for matches, burning his fingers on the hot lamp chimney. He struck a match, relighted the lamp, and glancing over at the bed, got a horrible mental jolt. Adam Farrell's face stared blindly at him, the dead eyes wide and blank, framed in the gnarled gray features. Even as Falred instinctively shuddered, his reason explained the apparent phenomenon. The sheet that covered the corpse had been carelessly thrown across the face, and the sudden puff of wind had disarranged and flung it aside. Yet there was something grisly about the thing, something fearsomely suggestive, as if, in the cloaking dark, a dead hand had flung aside the sheet, just as if the corpse were about to rise. Falred, an imaginative man, shrugged his shoulders at these ghastly thoughts and crossed the room to replace the sheet. The dead eyes seemed to stare at him malevolently, with an evilness that transcended the dead man's churlishness in life. The workings of a vivid imagination Falred knew, and he recovered the gray face, shrinking as his hand chanced to touch the cold flesh, slick and clammy, the touch of death. He shuddered with the natural revulsion of the living for the dead, and went back to his chair and magazine. At last, growing sleepy, he lay down upon a couch which, by some strange whim of the original owner, formed part of the room's scant furnishings, and composed himself for slumber. He decided to leave the light burning, telling himself that it was in accordance with the usual custom of leaving lights burning for the dead, for he was not willing to admit to himself that already he was conscious of a dislike for lying in the darkness with the corpse. He dozed, awoke with a start, and looked at the sheeted form of the bed. Silence reigned over the house, and outside it was very dark. The hour was approaching midnight, with its accompanying eerie domination over the human mind. Falred glanced again at the bed where the body lay and found the sight of the sheeted object most repellent. A fantastic idea had birth in his mind and grew, that beneath the sheet, the mere lifeless body had become a strange, monstrous thing, a hideous, conscious being that watched him with eyes which burned through the fabric of the cloth. This thought, a mere fantasy of course, he explained to himself by the legends of vampires, undead, ghosts, and such like the fearsome attributes with which the living have cloaked the dead for countless ages, since primitive man first recognized in death something horrid and apart from life. Man feared death, thought Falred, and some of his fear of death took hold on the dead so that they too were feared. And the sight of the dead engendered grisly thoughts, gave rise to dim fears of hereditary memory, lurking back in the dark corners of the brain. At any rate, that silent, hidden thing was getting on his nerves. He thought of uncovering the face, on the principle that familiarity breeds contempt. The sight of the features, calm and still in death, would banish, he thought, all such wild conjectures as were haunting him in spite of himself. But the thought of those dead eyes staring in the lamplight was intolerable. So at last he blew out the light and lay down. This fear had been stealing upon him so insidiously and gradually that he had not been aware of its growth. With the extinguishing of the light, however, and the blotting out of the sight of the corpse, things assumed their true character and proportions, and Falred fell asleep almost instantly, on his lips a faint smile for his previous folly. He awakened suddenly. How long he had been asleep he did not know. He sat up, his pulse pounding frantically, the cold sweat beading his forehead. He knew instantly where he was, remembered the other occupant of the room. But what had awakened him? A dream. Yes, now he remembered. A hideous dream in which the dead man had risen from the bed and stalked stiffly across the room with eyes of fire and a horrid leer frozen on his gray lips. Falred had seemed to lie motionless, helpless. Then as the corpse reached a gnarled and horrible hand, he had awakened. He strove to pierce the gloom, but the room was all blackness, and all without was so dark that no gleam of light came through the window. He reached a shaking hand toward the lamp, then recoiled as if from a hidden serpent. Sitting here in the dark with a fiendish corpse was bad enough, but he dared not light the lamp for fear that his reason would be snuffed out like a candle at what he might see. Horror, stark and unreasoning, had full possession of his soul. He no longer questioned the instinctive fears that rose in him. All those legends he had heard came back to him and brought a belief in them. Death was a hideous thing, a brain-shattering horror, imbuing lifeless men with a horrid malevolence. Adam Farrell in his life had been simply a churlish but harmless man. Now he was a terror, a monster, a fiend lurking in the shadows of fear, ready to leap on mankind with talons dipped deep in death and insanity. Falred sat there, his blood freezing, and fought out his silent battle. Faint glimmerings of reason had begun to touch his fright when a soft, stealthy sound again froze him. He did not recognize it as the whisper of the night wind across the windowsill. His frenzied fancy knew it only as the tread of death and horror. He sprang from the couch, then stood undecided. Escape was in his mind, but he was too dazed to even try to formulate a plan of escape. Even his sense of direction was gone. Fear had so stultified his mind that he was not able to think consciously. The blackness spread in long waves about him, and its darkness and void entered into his brain. His motions, such as they were instinctive. He seemed shackled with mighty chains, and his limbs responded sluggishly like an imbecile's. A terrible horror grew up in him and reared its grisly shape, that the dead man was behind him, was stealing upon him from the rear. He no longer thought of lighting the lamp, he no longer thought of anything. Fear filled his whole being. There was room for nothing else. He backed slowly away in the darkness, hands behind him, instinctively feeling the way. With a terrific effort, he partly shook the clinging mists of horror from him, and the cold sweat clammy upon his body strove to orient himself. He could see nothing, but the bed was across the room in front of him. He was backing away from it. There was where the dead man was lying, according to all rules of nature. If the thing were, as he felt behind him, then the old tales were true. Death did implant in lifeless bodies an unearthly animation, and dead men did roam the shadows to work their ghastly and evil will upon the sons of men. Then, great God, what was man but a wailing infant, lost in the night and beset by frightful things from the black abysses and the terrible unknown voids of space and time? These conclusions he did not reach by any reasoning process. They leaped full-grown into his terror-dazed brain. He worked his way slowly backward, groping, clinging to the thought that the dead man must be in front of him. Then his back-flung hands encountered something slick, cold, and clammy like the touch of death. A scream shook the echoes, followed by the crash of a falling body. The next morning, they who came to the house of death found 2 corpses in the room. Adam Farrell's sheeted body lay motionless upon the bed, and across the room lay the body of Fallred, beneath the shelf where Dr. Stein had absent-mindedly left his rubber gloves, slick and clammy to the touch of a hand groping in the dark, a hand of one fleeing his own rubber gloves, slick and clammy and cold, like the touch of death. Out of the deep tale of faring. Town Adam Falcon sailed at dawn, and Margaret Deverell, the girl who was to marry him, stood on the wharfs in the cold vagueness to wave a goodbye. At dusk, Margaret knelt, stony-eyed, above the still white form that the crawling tide had left crumpled on the beach. The people of Faringtown gathered about, whispering. The fog hung heavy. Mayhap she went ashore on Ghost Reef. Strange that his corpse alone should drift back to Faring Harbor, and so swiftly. And an undertone, alive or dead, he would come to her. The body lay above the tide mark, as if flung by a vagrant wave, slim but strong and virile in life, now darkly handsome even in death. The eyes were closed, strange to say, so it appeared that he but slept. The seaman's clothes he wore dripped salt water, and fragments of seaweed clung to them. Strange, muttered old John Harper, owner of the Sea Lion Inn and the oldest ex-seaman of Faringtown. He sank deep, for these weeds grow only at the bottom of the ocean, high in the cold green caves of the sea. Margaret spoke no word. She but knelt, her hands pressed to her cheeks, eyes wide and staring. "Take him in your arms, lass, and kiss him," gently urged the people of Faring, for 'tis what he would have wished, alive. The girl obeyed mechanically, shuddering at the coldness of his body. Then as her lips touched his, she screamed and recoiled. "This is not Adam," she shrieked, staring wildly about her. The people nodded sadly to each other. "Her brain is turned," they whispered. And then they lifted the corpse and bore it to the house wherein Adam Falcon had lived, where he had hoped to bring his bride when he returned from his voyage. And the people brought Margaret along with them, caressing her and soothing her with gentle words. But the girl walked like one in a trance, her eyes still staring in that strange manner. They laid the body of Adam Falcon on his bed with death candles at the head and feet, and the salt water from his garments trickled off the bed and splashed on the floor. For it is a superstition in Faringtown, as on many dim coasts, that monstrously bad luck will follow if a drowned man's clothes are removed. And Margaret sat there in the death room and spoke to none, staring fixedly at Adam's dark, calm face. And as she sat, John Gower, a rejected suitor of hers, and a moody, dangerous man, came and looking over her shoulder said, "Sea death brings a curious change, if that is the Adam Falcon I knew." Black looks were passed his way, whereat he seemed surprised, and men rose and quietly escorted him to the door. "You hated Adam Falcon, John Gower," said Tom Leary, "and you hate Margaret because the child preferred a better man than you. Now by Satan, you'll not be torturing the girl with your callous talk. Get out and stay." Gower scowled darkly at this, but Tom Leary stood up boldly to him, and the men of Faringtown backed him, so John turned his back squarely upon them and strode away. Yet to me it had seemed that what he had said had not been meant as a taunt or an insult, but simply the result of a sudden startling thought. And as he walked away, I heard him mutter to himself, alike and yet strangely unlike him. Night had fallen on Faringtown, and the windows of the houses blinked through the darkness. Through the windows of Adam Falcon's house glimmered the death candles where Margaret and others kept silent watch until dawn. And beyond the friendly warmth of the town's lights, the dusky green titan brooded along the strand, silent now as if in sleep, but ever ready to leap with hungry talons. I wandered down to the beach and, reclining on the white sand, gazed out over the slowly heaving expanse which coiled and billowed in drowsy undulations like a sleeping serpent. The sea, the great gray, cold-eyed woman of the ages, her tides spoke to me as they have spoken to me since birth, in the swish of the flat waves along the sand, in the wail of the ocean bird, in her throbbing silence. "I am very old and very wise," brooded the sea. "I have no part of man. I slay men, and even their bodies I fling back upon the cowering land. There is life in my bosom, but it is not human life," whispered the sea. "My children hate the sons of men." A shriek shattered the stillness and brought me to my feet, gazing wildly about me. Above the stars gleamed coldly, and their scintillant ghosts sparkled on the ocean's cold surface. The town lay dark and still, save for the death lights in Adam Falcon's house, and the echoes still shuddered through the pulsating silence. I was among the first to arrive at the door of the death room, and there halted aghast with the rest. Margaret Deverell lay dead upon the floor, her slender form crushed like a slim ship among shoals, and crouching over her, cradling her in his arms, was John Gower, the gleam of insanity in his wide eyes. And the death candles still flickered and leaped, but no corpse lay on Adam Falcon's bed. "God's mercy," gasped Tom Leary. "John Gower, ye fiend from hell, what devil's work is this?" Gower looked up. "I told you," he shrieked. "She knew, and I knew 'twas not Adam Falcon, that cold monster flung up by the mocking waves. 'Tis some demon inhabiting his corpse. Hark, I sought my bed and tried to sleep, but each time there came the thought of this soft girl sitting beside that cold, inhuman thing she thought her lover, and at last I rose and came to the window. Margaret sat, drowsing, and the others, fools that they were, slept in other parts of the house. And as I watched, he shook as a wave of shuddering passed over him. As I watched, Adam's eyes opened, and the corpse rose swift and stealthy from the bed where it lay. I stood without the window, frozen, helpless, and the ghastly thing stole upon the unknowing girl, with frightful eyes burning with hellish light and snaky arms outstretched. Then she woke and screamed, and then, oh, Mother of God! The dead man lapped her in his terrible arms, and she died without a sound. Gower's voice died out into incoherent gibberings, and he rocked the dead girl gently to and fro like a mother with a child. Tom Leary shook him. "Where is the corpse?" "He fled into the night," said John Gower tonelessly. Men looked at each other bewildered. "He lies," muttered they, deep in their beards. "He has slain Margaret himself, and hidden the corpse somewhere to bear out his ghastly tale." A sullen snarl shook the throng, and as one man they turned and looked where, on Hangman's Hill overlooking the bay, Lylip Canul's bleached skeleton glimmered against the stars. They took the dead girl from Gower's arms, though he clung to her, and laid her gently on the bed between the candles meant for Adam Falcon. Still she lay and white, and men and women whispered that she seemed more like one drowned than one crushed to death. We bore John Gower through the village streets, he not resisting but seeming to walk in a daze, muttering to himself. But in the square, Tom Leary halted. "This is a strange tale Gower told us," said he, "and doubtless a lie. Still, I am not a man to be hanging another without certainty. Therefore, let us place him in the stocks for safekeeping, while we search for Adam's corpse. Time enough for hanging afterwards." So this was done, and as we turned away, I looked back upon John Gower, who sat, head bowed upon his breast, like a man who is weary unto death. So under the dim wharfs and in the attics of houses and among stranded hulls, we searched for Adam Falcon's corpse. Back up into the hills behind the town, our hunt led us, where we broke up into groups and couples and scattered out over the barren downs. My companion was Michael Hansen, and we had gotten so far apart that the darkness cloaked him from me when he gave a sudden shout. I started toward him, and then the shout broke into a shriek, and the shriek died off into grisly silence. Michael Hansen lay dead on the earth, and a dim form slunk away in the gloom as I stood above the corpse, my flesh crawling. Tom Leary and the rest came on the run and gathered about, swearing that John Gower had done this deed also. "He has escaped somehow from the stocks," said they, and we legged it for the village at top speed. Aye, John Gower had escaped from the stocks and from his town's men's hate and from all the sorrows of life. He sat as we had left him, head bowed upon his breast. But one had come to him in the darkness, and though all his bones were broken, he seemed like a drowned man. Then stark horror fell like a thick fog on Faring Town. We clustered about the stocks, struck silent, till shrieks from a house on the outskirts of the village told us that the horror had struck again, and, rushing there, we found red destruction and death, and a maniac woman who whimpered before she died that Adam Falcon's corpse had broken through the window, flaming-eyed and horrible to rend and slay. A green slime fouled the room, and fragments of seaweed clung to the windowsill. Then fear, unreasoning and shameless, took possession of the men of Faring Town, and they fled to their separate houses, where they locked and bolted doors and windows and crouched behind them, weapons trembling in their hands and black terror in their souls. For what weapon can slay the dead? And through that deathly night, horror stalked through Faring Town and hunted the sons of men. Men shuddered and dared not even look forth when the crash of a door or window told of the entrance of the fiend into some wretch's cottage, when shrieks and gibberings told of its grisly deeds therein. Yet there was one man who did not shut himself behind doors to be there slaughtered like a sheep. I was never a brave man, nor was it courage that sent me out into the ghastly night. No, it was the driving power of a thought which had birth in my brain as I looked on the dead face of Michael Hansen. A vague and elusive thing it was, a hovering and an almost being, but not quite. Somewhere at the back of my skull it lurked, and I could not rest until I had proved or disproved that which I could not even formulate into a concrete theory. So with my brain in strange and chaotic condition, I stole through the shadows, warily. Mayhap the sea, strange and fickle even to her chosen, had whispered something to my inner mind, had betrayed her own. I know not. But all through the dark hours I prowled along the beach, and when, in the first gray light of the early dawn, a fiendish shape came striding down to the shore, I was waiting there. To all seeming, it was Adam Falcon's corpse, animated by some horrid life, which fronted me there in the gray gloom. The eyes were open now, and they glimmered with a cold light, like the reflections of some deep-sea hell. And I knew that it was not Adam Falcon who faced me. "Sea fiend," I said in an unsteady voice, "I know not how you came by Adam Falcon's apparel. I know not whether his ship went upon the rocks, or whether he fell overboard, or whether you climbed up the strake and over the rail and dragged him from his own deck. Nor do I know by what foul ocean magic you twisted your devil's features into a likeness of his. But this I know. Adam Falcon sleeps in peace beneath the blue tides. You are not he. That I suspected, now I know. This horror has come upon the earth of yore, so long ago that all men have forgotten the tales, all except such as I, whom men name fool. I know, and knowing, I fear you not, and here I slay you, for though you are not human, you may be slain by a man who does not fear you, even though that man be only a youth and considered strange and foolish. You have left your demon's mark upon the land. God alone knows how many souls you have reft, how many brains you have shattered this night. The ancients said your kind could do harm only in the form of men on land. Aye, you tricked the sons of men were born into their midst by kind and gentle hands, by men who knew not they carried a monster from the abysses. Now you have worked your will, and the sun will soon rise. Before that time you must be far below the green waters, basking in the accursed caverns that human eye has never looked upon save in death. There lies the sea and safety. I bar the way alone. He came upon me like a towering wave, and his arms were like green serpents about me. I knew they were crushing me, yet I felt as if I were drowning instead, and even then understood the expression that had puzzled me on Michael Hansen's face, that of a drowned man. I was looking into the inhuman eyes of the monster, and it was as if I gazed into untold depths of oceans, depths into which I should presently tumble and drown, and I felt scales neck, arm and shoulder. He gripped me, bending me back to break my spine, and I drove my knife into his body again and again and again. He roared once, the only sound I ever heard him make, and it was like the roar of the tides among the shoals. Like the pressure of 100 fathoms of green water was the grasp upon my body and limbs, and then, as I thrust again, he gave way and crumpled to the beach. He lay there writhing and then was still, and already he had begun to change. Mermen, the ancients named his kind, knowing they were endowed with strange attributes, one of which was the ability to take the full form of a man if lifted from the ocean by the hands of men. I bent and tore the human clothing from the thing, and the first gleams of the sun fell upon a slimy and moldering mass of seaweed, from which stared two hideous dead eyes, a formless bulk that lay at the water's edge, where the first high wave would bear it back to that from which it came, the cold jade ocean deeps.